Hello, my name's Rory and today I'm going to talk to you about an email account compromise and what we can do to reduce our risk of becoming a victim to this form of cybercrime. Email account compromise is a form of fraud that relies on the fraudster having unauthorized access to one or more email accounts. In 2021, the FBI estimated that losses as a result of this form of fraud were in the vicinity of 2.4 billion US dollars. This makes it the most lucrative single category of cybercrime reported on, and it represents more than 1/3 of all the categories of cybercrime reported on for 2021. The perpetrators of such fraud are remorseless and highly skilled predators. But I believe that with some basic principles, we can greatly reduce our risk of falling victim to these fraudsters. We'll be looking at the threat, i.e., who are they and what do they want? Nuts and bolts. How do they get access to your email account? And once they're in there, what do they do? Prevention. These are the basic principles that you can apply that will hopefully reduce your vulnerability greatly. And finally, cure. If you are in the unfortunate situation where someone has perpetrated this scam on you, what can you do to reduce the amount of damage that is caused? Understanding the threat is important. The better we understand the threat, the better our precautions can be. The more seriously we take the threat, the better is the chance that we will sustain these precautions in the long run. When we're interested in who the cyber criminals are, our primary concern is about their capability and capacity to perform cybercrime. Often in the media, these cyber criminals are represented as individuals, and there are indeed a large number of individual perpetrators of cybercrime. But recently, over the last few years, cybercrime has become quite complicated when it comes to actually monetizing it. And that means that a cybercrime perpetrator as an individual has to understand a lot of aspects of that life cycle. And as a result, many of them don't have the capacity to take us all on board. And so what they will do is they will move towards ad hoc networks. These are loose commercial relationships with other cyber criminals that are formed around online forums or online marketplaces. These networks allow them to trade with these other cyber criminals, and this produces two important effects. The first effect is that cyber criminals can be far more opportunistic. A cyber criminal who normally steals credit card details, for instance, may very well grab a convenient collection of medical personal information and hang on to that in the hopes that they can sell it to another cyber criminal. Secondly, the chances of a cyber criminal now monetizing their crime has increased. For example, a cyber criminal who specializes in bank account details may have access to someone's bank account but no ability to successfully and anonymously extract the money from that account. They might therefore sell these details to someone who does have access to money laundering infrastructure, which would allow them to get away without a trace with the money from the account, and in return both the cyber criminals profit from this one collection of access details. The one bit of friction in an ad hoc network is that by definition it has to be anonymous. All the participants are anonymous, and before they can trade with other cyber criminals, they will need to develop a reputation and cross a trust barrier. And so that will take a bit of time to build up, and there's always some friction, and there's often no honor amongst thieves. And so that does reduce the efficiency of the ad hoc network somewhat. An evolution from this is cybercrime as a business. And we've definitely seen these gain prominence with the increase in ransomware over the last few years. These cybercrime businesses will exhibit all the behaviors and artifacts that we associate with a legitimate business. They will have customer support channels, they'll have victim support channels in the case of ransomware, they'll recruit for staff, they will probably have some sort of human resources or financial management function. They might even have a marketing or PR arm. The benefit of this cybercrime as a business is that they manage to collect all the same vast array of skills needed to monetize cybercrime within a formal infrastructure which will be more efficient than the networks. And in addition, they don't have a trust barrier that they have to cross because hopefully that is already baked into the organization. Another avenue, probably an increase in terms of capacity and capability over cybercrime as a business, is organized crime groups. These are traditionally what we'd associate with organized crime. They're quite comfortable conducting various crimes in the non-online realm, extortion, protection rackets, human trafficking, narcotics, and for them cybercrime is just another form of revenue. There's a number of organized crime groups that have successfully moved into cybercrime. One of the most prolific is a group out of Nigeria known as the Black Axe, which has got quite a global reach. And this global reach and comfort with physical activity means that there is a chance that they could combine physical crime with cybercrime. For instance, a cyber attack that then opens the door for a physical break-in or something like that. Finally, at the top of the resources and capability pyramid, we have countries. Now, generally one would expect that countries would direct their cyber activities against other countries, and this does happen. There's cyber espionage, in some cases sabotage via online means. But there have been cases where countries have been implicated in conducting operations against commercial enterprises within a country or across a wide range of countries. One of the most prolific in terms of allegations of behavior, at least, is North Korea. If all the allegations are to be believed, then over the last few years they have amassed a fortune of hundreds of millions, if not billions of US dollars at this point, by conducting bank heists and breaking into cryptocurrency exchanges and a vast array of other activities. So that's the general rogues gallery that we are dealing with. The next thing to do is to try and understand what they want. What are they looking to extract from their victims? An important part of quantifying the threat that cybercriminals pose is to understand what they want once they've compromised an email account. This not only helps us defend that information better, but it also helps us take appropriate action if we do fall prey to these cybercriminals. Many cybercriminals want to monetize their access as quickly as possible. Very often with email account compromise, we'll see a form of attack that's often called invoice fraud. In short, what this involves is the cybercriminal injecting himself into a transaction and funneling the funds into their own bank account. Even if there isn't an opportunity for the cybercriminal to monetize their access immediately, most people's email accounts are full of information that the cybercriminal can use. They can use this for identity theft, as part of industrial espionage, to perform extortion, or even launch attacks on third parties. Finally, having access to someone's email account also perhaps gives the cybercriminal access to other systems. With many online systems, if you forget your password, the provider will send you a forgot password link in an email to your email address. If the cybercriminal has access to your email address, they can use that to take control of your account. In this section, we'll be looking at the mechanics of email account compromise. How do the criminals gain access, and what do they do once they have access? It is important to remember that the situation is dynamic. The criminals are continually adjusting their techniques, so it's best to think of these as principles of behavior rather than hard and fast examples. When it comes to gaining access, criminals have a myriad of means available to them. Some of these are very technical and some of them are not technical at all. For our presentation today, we are going to look at perhaps the least technical means of them all, which uses techniques developed over hundreds, if not thousands of years. This approach is known as social engineering, and it is effectively the use of human psychology and societal norms to control someone's behavior to achieve the goal that you want. If you've ever seen a small child throwing a very loud tantrum in a very public place, then you have seen social engineering in action. In the case of our fraudster, they have a number of different psychological and other levers that they can pull. We are going to touch on a very small selection of them in the following slides. Greed is a very common theme. They try to offer a deal that's just too good to be true, and very often people, based on a variety of circumstances, will follow that path. Often, when you hear stories about people being scammed, you often think, oh, they were greedy. But the reality is we're all susceptible to this. Another favorite of scammers is to create a situation of urgency. They might tell you that time is short, that you need to do something quickly, or else there will be dire consequences. And by doing this, they force our brain to narrow the options that we have available to it and just focus on the task at hand, and not to think about or try and rationalize the actions that we are performing. They can also try and trigger strong emotions in us. I think it's quite a human experience to do or say something that we wouldn't ordinarily do when we're in the grip of a strong emotion, whether that's anger or fear or even intense embarrassment, or fear of intense embarrassment even. Finally, there's curiosity. This can actually be quite powerful. One of the first major viruses at the turn of the century used a subject line that was a variation on offering a love letter or a love message, and this proved to be quite a strong lure. It was so strong, in fact, that there are stories that even after people knew that it was a virus, they were so curious about this first virus that they still opened the attachment and spread the virus even further. So those are our examples. Those are some of our levers. We are now going to look at some examples of these levers in action. Let's look at some examples of these social engineering principles in practice. These examples are received via email and text message. When social engineering is delivered to us via email, we traditionally call that phishing with a PH. Via text message is known as smishing, which uses the SMS abbreviation at the start of the word. There is also the possibility of being socially engineered via a voice phone call, which is traditionally referred to as vishing. And vishing could take the form of someone pretending to phone from your bank, reporting fraud or some irregularity, and they just need to confirm account details. And they will use this process to extract information from you that they can then perhaps leverage to gain access to your bank account. When looking at the examples, remember that these examples are operating on the bottom end of the quantity versus quality scale. They might look ridiculous or crude to you, and you'll think, I will never fall for them. But the scammers are relying on the fact that no human being is perfectly rational all the time. And for a small percentage of the recipients, they will be operating under a set of circumstances where they are more likely to click on the link in the mail or do something else. On the other end of the quantity versus quality scale is what is known as spear phishing. These are highly targeted emails or SMSs or voice phone calls targeted at a small group or even a single individual. In these cases, the scammers will have done their homework and they'll be much harder to detect and protect against. As I click on each example, I'll pause for a couple of seconds, so feel free to pause the video and see if you can pick out the elements before I start talking. This is supposedly an email from Norton telling me that my subscription has expired. Near the top we see that they're offering an incredible 80% renewal discount, but it's only today. So the 80% renewal discount is tying into a bit of greed that we mentioned earlier, but also a psychological phenomenon known as loss aversion. Loss aversion means that we as human beings don't like losing something that we already have. In my case, this will be the money, the extra money that I'm going to spend if I don't take advantage of the discount. Then we have urgency. It's today. It's a limited time offer. They've applied a date. I have to act now. So perhaps I'm not going to think quite as rationally as I would because I have limited time. Down towards the bottom, we've got it will run the risk of viruses and other malware, and that your computer becomes more susceptible for many different virus threats. Right? So this is creating what's known as fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They're creating that sort of fear response, an emotional response. Perhaps I'm worried about the embarrassment or the inconvenience if my computer becomes infected. All of these factors tie together to try and edge me closer to the point where I'm going to click on that link. In this email, we again have urgency elements. In the subject, there are the words final warning. In the address, the sender address is open immediately. In addition, we have a financial aspect. You have been paid now. So again, this is combining with, well, a final warning is never good, right? And something about payment. So if I don't react immediately, I might lose that payment. And finally, we have a new element which we haven't really touched on before. This green bar with some text in it towards the bottom of the message. The green bar says it was sent from a trusted sender. The scammer has crafted it to look like it was added by your mail provider, so that if you accessing your mail in your web browser, as many people do for something like Gmail, it might look like your mail provider added that. And you most likely trust your mail provider, so you're more likely to trust them when they say that this is a trusted sender. But of course, it was added by the scammer and it's completely fake. This is a text message from a company known as Luno, which is a well-known cryptocurrency exchange. It's telling me that my wallet has not been updated and my account will be blocked. Again, a sense of urgency, possibly loss aversion. Cryptocurrency is very often a volatile environment, and so I might want to be able to react to market changes quickly. In addition, they've given us an address, a link to tap on. And the address is what's also known as a URL. And in this case, we can see that the URL might look a bit differently to some URLs that we are used to seeing. This is what is known as a shortened URL, and it actually hides the true destination. This is legitimately used in a lot of cases, especially text messages, where a long URL can be cumbersome. But in this case, the scammer is using it to hide the true destination, in case that the true destination would make you more suspicious or more likely to ignore the link. Let us say I'm having a bad day. I've clicked on a link in a phishing email and now the scammers have access to my mailbox. How are they going to capitalize on this access? In the next few slides, we'll show you an example of a typical attack. And bear in mind that this is just one example of a myriad of possible attacks. Scammers are very skilled and they will adapt the attacks to fit the circumstances at hand. In many attacks, the first thing the scammer will do is set up a forwarding rule on the victim's mailbox. In this case, victim@gmail.com is my mailbox, and scammer@gmail.com is their email address. So any mails that come into victim@gmail.com automatically get forwarded onto their email address, where they can sit and at their leisure look through the mails and try and figure out if there's potential to perform some sort of fraud. Then at some point, let us assume that a client of mine has just sent me a mail asking for my bank details so that they can transfer in payment. This mail, like all the other mails, has been forwarded on to the scammer, and the scammer now knows that they have a limited amount of time to act and take control of this transaction. The first thing that they are going to do is remove the evidence. So they are going to delete this mail from my client asking for my bank details so that I can never see it. This reduces the chances that I have to pick up that something's going wrong, or perhaps interfere with the transaction by sending a second set of bank details. Next, the scammer will take control of the transaction by sending the client their own bank details. They might send this from my email account for extra legitimacy, seeing as they have access to my mail account, or they might create a lookalike of my mail account. In this case, this is victim@gmail.com, except they've replaced the I's with ones. They might then apply social engineering principles on my client to try and get them to pay more quickly, because they know their window of opportunity is small. At some point, I might speak to my client and they might reveal that they're still waiting on banking details from me. So they want to get the transaction completed as quickly as possible. Once the transaction is completed, it will go into a bank account that belongs to someone who's known as a money mule. A money mule's job is, knowingly or unknowingly, to help launder the money so that the scammer can get hold of the money without fear of it being blocked or without fear of law enforcement following the trail. This might involve turning it into cryptocurrency, transferring the money quickly out of the country, or even just converting it into cash. But at this process, once this is done and once the money has been moved through the money mule's account, the scam is effectively done. And you have a limited amount of time as the victim to try and recover those funds. Let us look at some ways we can make ourselves less vulnerable to cyber criminals. There's a lot of information in this section, so I'm just going to touch on each item lightly, but there will be a link on the last slide of this presentation which will point to some additional resources. It's a good idea to approach all emails with some degree of skepticism. When you receive a mail, look for things that seem off. Look at the sender address. We've seen that scammers like to use lookalike addresses, or perhaps addresses coming from generic mail providers such as Gmail or Yahoo or Outlook. Look at the time the mail was sent. Does it fit in with the kind of mail that you're receiving? For example, in general, business emails will be sent in business hours. Look at the content. Is there anything off about the content? Maybe perhaps the tone of language that is being used, or even the sender might be trying to introduce an inappropriate or unreasonable amount of urgency into a transaction. Don't click on links in emails. If you can, go to the site that supposedly sent you the email and look for the information there without clicking on the link. If that's not an option, right click on the link, copy the URL and paste it into a plain text document, the kind of thing that you would open up in Notepad. Inspect the URL. If anything seems off about it, don't go any further. But if you're happy, copy and paste that URL into the address bar of your browser. Finally, if you've received banking details or some other form of payment details via email, it's a good idea to always confirm these out of band. Out of band in this context means you can't confirm it using an email. If it's a business, what you can do is look up the business using your favorite search engine, phone the business and ask them to confirm the payment details while you're on the call. To protect yourself and those around you, say your colleagues or family members, use strong, unique passwords whenever you're creating an account on an online service. Implement two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication means that password is insufficient to give you access to your account. You need some sort of other temporary token. Usually this token might be sent to you via SMS or via email, or you might have an app on your phone that generates a random number every minute or so. Two-factor authentication is not a silver bullet, but some forms of it can provide some protection against phishing. And at any rate, it's better to have two-factor authentication than to not have it. Check your email settings regularly. You're especially looking for forwarding rules that you don't recognize. Apply updates to your electronic devices that are connected to the internet as soon as you become aware of them. So this would be the obvious stuff like computers, tablets, smartphones, but also the less obvious stuff such as your Wi-Fi router, your media player, or your smart TV, or any other smart device that's connected to the internet. If you can, take the opportunity to do some training about cybercrime or phishing. There's some resources online that are free, others that you have to pay for, and it's a good idea to repeat this on a frequent basis as it is a perishable skill. Finally, both for yourself and for others, remove the stigma around falling prey to these cyber criminals. The usual narrative is that these people were gullible or stupid if they get scammed, but it really isn't the case. The scammers are very good at what they do, and we are just unprepared. If we remove the stigma, people are more likely to come forward about it, and then we can take corrective measures a lot sooner. Finally, if you're a business, there's some ways that you can protect others, specifically your customers. So rather than using a generic mailbox, e.g. Rory's Fantastic Company at gmail.com, it is a better idea to register the domain and send your mail from that domain. So I would create rorysfantasticcompany.com, and I would send my mail from addresses that are at rorysfantasticcompany.com. Doing this allows you to apply extra protective measures that aren't available to you on a generic mailbox. These are things known as DKIM and SPF, which can make it harder for scammers to spoof mail so that they look as if they're coming from your domain. Give your customers channels to validate any bank details that you send them, or even better yet, don't send them details at all. Rather, just ask customers to phone in to get those details if they need them. This might seem like extra admin and extra inconvenience that you're adding, and it is. But the benefit is it'll be harder for scammers to spoof banking details and redirect funds that should be going to your company. or perhaps to your customers. Research has found that people are far more likely to comply with additional inconveniences if they understand what protection they are getting as a result of this inconvenience. So it's a good idea to educate your customers, explain to them why you don't want to send them bank details via email. In most cases, I think people, once they understand what they're being protected against, will not only be happy to apply it, but also to sustain these preventative measures in the long run, which is really what we want. This is the last part of the presentation. In it, we are going to look at steps that you can take if you have become the victim of a cyber criminal. The steps shown in the following slides are fairly generic and the sequence is loose, so feel free to ignore some of them or change the order if that makes sense for your particular set of circumstances. Firstly, we want to try and reduce the damage as much as possible. Contact your bank if there's been any sort of transaction involved in this crime and report the fraud. Contact the police. Your bank might require that you do this anyway, but even if they don't, you have been the victim of a crime and you must report it to the police. Change your email credentials, preferably using a device that you don't normally use to access your email account. Check your email settings. You're looking for those forwarding rules that the scammers like to set up. Scan as many of your devices as possible with antivirus software. While phishing is still the most popular way to get hold of someone's credentials, it doesn't mean that they won't have installed some sort of virus on one of your systems. Next, secure your wider environment. Identify credentials that you might have that are particularly sensitive. For example, your bank account details if you do online banking. Change those passwords. While you are changing the passwords, if you haven't done so already, implement multi-factor authentication. Preserve whatever data you can. This would be any emails that were sent either by you or the other legitimate party or the scammers themselves. This will be useful both in terms of trying to determine the scope of the damage, but also you might need to provide this to the police as evidence. You also want to ask your service provider to provide you with any email logs that they might have. These again will be useful to try and determine when the scammers first gained access to your email account and some of the mechanics about how they performed the fraud. The final step is damage assessment. What you want to try and do is look through the evidence we obtained in the previous step to see if there's perhaps any other incidents that have yet to come to light. For instance, have the scammers perhaps sent out other fake invoices that you're not aware of at the moment? You also want to see if there are other mailboxes perhaps within your organization or perhaps mailboxes belonging to family members that may have been compromised. If there are, you want to follow the same process for those as well. At the end of the day, I hope you never have to use these steps and you have a life free of scammers. But just in case, hopefully now you've got some idea of some things that you can do when the worst does happen. Okay, so we're almost done. Just before I go, there's a link on screen that you can follow to get extra information. And please feel free to email me at the displayed email address if you have any questions or comments or tips on how I can do this better. Thank you very much for your time. I hope it wasn't too grueling, and I hope that you've learned something at least that will help make you safer. If you did find this video to be of value, please share it with people that you know. The more aware people are, the less likely it is that cyber criminals will succeed. Thank you very much.